Good. You're welcome to Kent Academic Exchange. And with me today are two gentlemen who I feel very honored to have them on board. These are men, I respect their opinions. And without much ado, I introduce David Endeli Otto, who is an international security expert, a Cameroonian by nationality, and someone who appears regularly in the press internationally. Based right now, I think, or might just be visiting Abuja, Nigeria. David, welcome. I also have with me, yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
I also have with me Omoniyi Oriogun, who is a New York City attorney and a commentator on Nigeria and international affairs. He is a Nigerian by nationality, but in the diaspora, and I think is also an American national.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction.
Very good. We have before us today an issue of international importance, one which exercises the minds of anyone who has an interest of Africa at heart, and anyone who indeed is observing what the news wires are saying on a daily basis right now. It's a matter of current importance, and that's the coup d'etat in Niger. Niger Republic is a West African nation. Niger has experienced a coup. This is a dangerous hop-back to the periods of military rule in Africa. And the latest on the coup and its ever interesting set of developments is that today is the expiration of the deadline given by the West African ECOWAS bloc, who have issued an ultimatum to the coup plotters to revert the country to civilian rule and to cede power, presumably into the hands of the legitimate holder of that power, that's the last democratic president of Niger. So that deadline has arrived. Will the leaders of the coup stand down? Will they cave in, or will they put up a resistance? And this is against the backdrop of a slight division between the ECOWAS bloc itself, with some countries, Mali, and I think Burkina Faso, appearing to dissent with what the ECOWAS bloc said, and they are very controversially said they would consider the implementation of this plan against the military junta as a declaration of war, and that they would clearly take sides with the government of the day, making it all look like a very complex and terrible situation that we are about to have in Niger. Let's set this up against the background of doctrine. Let's set this up against the background of both international law, geopolitics, and the rest. We all know that the right to democratic existence, democratic rule, is one which appears to be an emergent right in international law today. Today, more than the largest percentage of the world's population lives under democratic rule. Just over 50 years ago, there was much less, fewer than 30 democracies around the world, but now we have new entrants into the democratic world, and we have various types of democracy. We have full democracies, we have flawed democracies, we have hybrid democracies, and then we have on the other side authoritarian regimes, which is what Niger is about to join now. The question, therefore, is the emerging rights to democracy is under threat in Niger. Do we have an obligation under international law to bring this aberration back to normalcy? Do we have a situation where international law allows us a legitimizing function to invade Niger and bring back normalcy and bring them back to this what we may know as this shared sense of community expectation of the populace of Niger and of the world to have a democratic rule? Is there a right to democracy which is being put to shame in Niger? I'll put these questions widely to you, gentlemen, but I suppose if I have to narrow it down, the question really is, what is the legitimacy of the actions of the ECOWAS, and how will that play out over the next few hours, if not at most days, in relation to the deadline given? Can I start with you, David?
Yes, thank you very much for having us on this discourse, which it's of very grave importance, as you rightly mentioned, not just to the continent of Africa, but as regards to the current dynamics of geopolitics. This is something that concerns the entire world. Talking about legitimacy, I think one of the first comments that I would make is that in a democratic system, like the one that Niger is supposed to have, and I use the word suppose deliberately, you would expect that it is a government that comes to power, as we know, through the ballot box. President Bazoum, who's now been dethroned, was elected or supposedly elected by the people, but legitimately he won the presidency. So he's the recognized, president, through the democratic system. So for the military to turn the tables and overthrow him on the 26th of July, that itself, it's not legitimate, because of course it does not conform to the Constitution of Niger Republic. The Constitution demands that a president might only be removed from power, one through the electoral process, and perhaps maybe through the if he's impeached, by the assembly, or if he decides to resign, because of inability or incapacity, to run. It does not, permit. It doesn't give room for anyone to remove the president through the barrel of a gun. So constitutionally, there has been an injury that has been caused to the Constitution, and that is why every right-thinking human being, and not just people who are interested in legislation, has condemned this military coup. And people have come very strongly to say that it is not the right method to remove a sitting president who was elected by the people. But environment, circumstances, makes history.
We already have that crisis, as we both agree, seem to agree on there, that it's an anomaly.
Yes.
It's something we regret happening, but the pragmatics of the situation right now is that there are two sides to how to proceed. One side is to tolerate the coup. Another side is to have it removed either by accelerated negotiations and diplomacy, or in the last resort, removal by what you security experts like to call kinetic force, enforcement, and an invasion. What I can tell you what the legality is, and I'll probably say it along the lines, but what are the pragmatic expectations of those of you in the security field? Do you think this is going to actually lead to an invasion? Are we going to see action, especially at the end of this, by tomorrow, presumably, or sometime later this week?
Yeah, so this is in the context of the fact that, and within that ultimatum, ECOWAS has made it very clear that there is an option for a military intervention. That has talked out of all the sanctions that ECOWAS levied. But we also know that ECOWAS, and especially Nigeria, has cut off electricity in Niger, which it does supply. But we're talking here about the possibility of a military intervention. I think it was hasty, in my opinion, for ECOWAS to have at this point in time introduce a military intervention option. It's almost like placing the cat amongst the pigeons.
But fantastic. You think it's hasty, but you are not ruling it out completely as an option at some point down the line. You envisage a world where it can happen, but you don't think we are there now.
I don't think there is an appetite for any military intervention, and that is why it's not a straightforward. It can happen or it cannot happen. It's about the prevailing factors from a military point of view, understanding how defense and security works, and someone who has studied the ecosystem of coup d'etats, I would tell you that there is a window in which a military intervention can have an effect in terms of a particular outcome, because you don't go to war without an objective. You've got a mission, and your mission, if your mission is to restore, as ECOWAS has said, to restore the deposed president, that window has expired. One, they do not have access to the president. They don't know where he is. They might think they do. Secondly, the 24 hours window where you can intervene has passed. This was a time when the presidential guards, did not have the full support of all the military agencies within Niger. This was a time when the population had not, put itself to support fully the, what the military had done. So as soon as that hour passes, and in the specific scenario that we have, you have a situation where the military has now united with the presidential force and the air force. All the agencies are with the military juntas. The population seems to be in full support. I have seen the level of crowd that has supported them. That itself means that any military intervention would have to gather support from outside the Niger Republic. And that means, it puts ECOWAS in a very challenging position. Not only that, from a military point, you need to have the weapons, you need to have what you call your national intelligence estimate. How long are you going to fight? What is the capacity of your opponents? The ECOWAS doesn't know the capacity of Niger, simply because now Niger has friends, like Burkina Faso and Mali and Guinea. Chad has refused to join the bandwagon of ECOWAS, even though it's not a member of ECOWAS. So you can't go to war if you don't know the capacity of your enemy. It doesn't mean it means
David, may I push you on that one? We do know the capacity of Niger. We do know that Niger has roughly 14,000 to 15,000 men. When you have only 15,000 men as soldiers, your capacity by all definition is very limited. When you have a country that is landlocked, when you have a country that is landlocked and can only be reached by air, and most of the countries around it, I guess you've mentioned 2 or 3 that have said they won't be part of it. But to get to even to those countries that will not join, you will need to go over this airspace of other states. I don't think Niger is in a very good position. And I think there's a lot of assumption that it has this hidden capacity. And Niger is one of the poorest, it's one of the least developed states in the world. It does not have a strong military, and it won't have one over the next 3 months.
I think that's a mistake.
Yeah,
I think that's a mistake that a lot of analysts have made to measure war in terms of might. In the 21st century, war is not just about military capacity. There are issues of morals. There are issues of legitimacy. we are coming from the backdrop of a situation where Russia justified the invasion of Ukraine. However, ill-felt or ill-mannered those justifications are. Russia has one of the biggest military in the world. You cannot even place Ukraine, amongst the first, 50. But what we see is that, might is not always the answer. The kind of support that Ukraine is getting is not something that Russia envisaged.
Yeah, but you have the whole world support, the whole Western world, please permit my little slip there, the whole Western world committed to the supply of weapons, intelligence, propaganda on behalf of Ukraine. I don't think it's fair to make a parallel between an exact parallel between Ukraine and Niger. Can you let me move very briefly to Omoniyi?
Please.
Omoniyi, yes. Omoniyi, the same question to you. Do you think something ought to be made out of the deadline that has been given and communicated, and it's now over? What's your case for dealing with this crisis in Niger?
It's an interesting one, I think, because if you're looking at ECOWAS and its core principles that underline its creation, there are a number of things that strike out to me here that may, on the surface, be slightly inimical to stuff. And I would say the first is there's an underlying principle that relates to the non-interference in the internal affairs of member states. And then there's the promotion of peace and security in the region. And it seems on the surface, both those two core principles may appear to be clashing or in conflict. One of the things from Nigeria's perspective, and I'm sure what Nigeria is concerned about, is you have gradually starting to evolve a raft of coups inspired or encouraged, one doesn't entirely know at the moment which one it is, by the Wagner group, especially in Mali and Burkina Faso and now Niger, and they all have contiguous borders. So there's a prospect that there is some type of contagion going on, where it would sort of move to Benin, which is also a border state of Niger, is another thing that may also concern Nigeria. So from an ECOWAS perspective, there's obviously a big issue to consider, and which of the two core principles, which appear to be heading in somewhat of a conflict, would sort of take precedence in this particular issue. And I guess it's for ECOWAS member states to determine which is the most important at this given time. And then when we move along slightly to the viability of intervention, I to some extent, obviously, I'm not a security expert like David, but I would be inclined to sort of look at your view with a bit more seriousness, and that's just looking at the data. From what I've seen, Niger has an army of about 33,000. Nigeria alone has an army of about 220,000 armed forces personnel. Niger spends roughly about 247 million on its budget. Nigeria spends about 4 billion on its budget. Niger is 2/3 or a third larger than Nigeria is, which means, well, it's a third larger than Nigeria, and it has, I think, about 7 countries that border it. And with such a relatively small armed forces, it's going to be a very, very difficult job for it to defend all its borders in an effective way. And then you have the tribal dimension. Niger is, I believe, 57% Hausa, but the army and the power structure seem to support the second largest tribe. I think they're called the Njema or the Zawa. The name sort of escapes me for now. They tend to be dominant in the power structure in the military, and their region is roughly around the region of where the capital Niamey is, which is the southern western part of Niger. So the majority Hausa tend to be congregated more in the central part of Niger, the central part, and which seems geographically wise quite a distance from where the capital is and from where the home base of the ruling establishment, especially in the military, is. So the question to be asked, and it's a sincere one, because almost every African country deals with what you call tribal fissions in its society. How strong is the support of the Niger people as opposed to this small group or tribe within Niger that seems to have dominant power within Niger? And only time will tell on that one. But what ECOWAS, and especially what Nigeria has to be concerned about, is the contagion risk and this raft of domino effect of coups happening in countries bordering Niger, like Mali, Burkina Faso, and which other country within ECOWAS is going to be the next to fall. Exactly. And Nigeria definitely has a strategic influence and interest in the West African sub-region and its borders. And it being itself being a democracy, it also has to be concerned about the influence of the Wagner Group in sort of inspiring changes or military changes in governance in West African states. And obviously, as you probably know, there's this interesting thing about the pipeline that was supposed to go from Nigeria straight to Niger and to Algeria, and to be an alternate source of gas supply to Europe. And there is a consideration whether Russia is playing a geopolitical game for its own economic survival, which is playing out in the African sub-region. So thank you
very much, Omoniyi, on that point. I will let you go on that theme, but if I may just come in there, there is this assumption that the intervention in Niger would have to have come from either of two things. One, either it was sponsored by a state like Russia, or it's actually sponsored by or as a result of the faults of France. Do we really have any proof that is either of these situations? Could this just be a wild card of international relations? And it really has nothing to do with Russia, because if you look at all the tea leaves, you find enough reasons to come to both conclusions. Russia itself had obviously condemned the coup when it's supposed to have happened. France, on the other hand, is a country with a long-standing relationship with Niger and a base in Niger as we speak, and a lot of economic benefit. There is no proof that the current leaders are either from either of these two, forces. Could there be a third reason? And both of you could.
Yes, I think we have to be very careful how we accuse any of whether be it Russia or France, to have been behind the coup without any solid evidence, as you rightly said. But circumstances have to be analyzed and then left, for people to draw their conclusions. Now, in terms of coup d'etats, there is always a difference between people that support a coup directly and people who benefit from a coup. But also, there is also the third option, those who plan a coup. Most often, you find out that, there is one faction that plans a coup, there is another faction that supports a coup, and there is also the third faction that benefits from a coup. So these are all different stakeholders, in a coup process. When you look at the circumstances of Niger and then look at the precedents that we've had with Burkina Faso, Mali, and Guinea, but not just that. look at the history of coup d'etats that have happened in all these countries, what is very clear is that in all the previous coups that all these countries have had in combination, including countries like Nigeria, we did not have any inclination that either Russia or Wagner was behind. So why do we say that Russia or Wagner is now involved in any of these recent coups?
Yeah, but then that also stands for the possibility that Russia may not intervene. Why are we so sure that Russia is going to intervene and expand its theaters of war? We know that it could happen, but from what you've just said, we don't have enough proof, the evidence that Russia would actually support or Wagner would suddenly show up in a country where there are two other competitors, if we may use that term, the French Republic and the USA, having bases in that country. These guys don't want to show up in each other's, territory like that. Yeah.
That's why it's important, Doctor, to always make analysis based on predictions. And, perhaps, we are all speculating, but speculations based on analysis, not just wild speculation. Now, the reason why, there is a strong argument that Russia would get involved in Niger is because, if you look at the trend of what has been happening in that belt, for example, in Central African Republic, Russia got involved, after France suggested, to President Assange, to Adora, that, they could go to Russia to seek help. That's how Russia jumped into the whole African thing. And then, of course, they benefited from, the coup in Mali. They were called in, and, their support, was granted through the Wagner Group. That followed the situation in Burkina Faso. Between Central African Republic, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Mali, Russia has benefited from the coups. There hasn't been any evidence that Russia has been behind the coup. What we have seen is that soldiers have taken power, for individual benefits, and then they've gone for support. Called upon countries like Russia to support them. Because of course they know that the East is always at loggerheads with the West. So it is in the same situation that we're making the analysis of Niger Republic. This was perhaps one of those coups that was organized by General Siani himself of the Presidential Guard, and then of course he knew that there is a common trend. He would have support from Burkina Faso and Mali and Guinea, of course, because they are beneficiaries of the coup. And that's one of the reasons why I think, just to, fast forward a little bit, I think that ECOWAS and President Bola Ahmed Tinubu selected the leader of, who was a coup beneficiary of Chad, President Mahamat, to go and speak to the coup leaders. That was the first move that ECOWAS made. So there is this thing that people are saying, oh, Wagner and Russia, are behind the coup. It's because people do not distinguish between somebody who plans a coup, someone who supports a coup, and someone who benefits from a coup. I think what is going on now is that Russia is benefiting from these military coups, and then supporting them in the later period. But one thing I want to make very clear is that let us not measure the strength of countries in terms of their military might, to determine whether they will win a war. I mean, I understand that you believe that, which is right.
I get your point. I get your point. But there are different types of wars. I
just want to make that point. Let me just, I just want to make that point because I think it should be very clear. I understand that Nigeria has the might, but you and I know, and others know, that one of the biggest challenges of the Nigerian military is that they are overstressed. So the question that you've got to ask yourself, with this number of military that you've mentioned that Nigeria has, how many of these men is Nigeria ready to?
This is not a Nigerian operation alone.
And what is happening?
It's not going to be a Nigerian operation alone. There are other African countries that have committed to this line of action as well. I know there's a lot of attention on Nigeria, but there are
Yes.
also other West African countries that are committed to action, and their concerted efforts cannot be ignored. We also have to remember that this is not the other countries are not coming over to take over the territory. It's not a territorial war. This is about chasing out a government. Who says that the government is so strong that it can resist?
Doctor, with all respect, all respect, war is not as, Mr. Omoniyi, sorry,
Hello?
I'm speaking a bit more. You cannot determine, yes, you cannot determine how a particular war is going to go. You can determine how you're going to get in, what you're going to do, but you are not guaranteed.
In other words,
we should
abandon. In other words, we should abandon all the sections and provisions in international treaties that make for peacemaking as opposed to peacekeeping. In other words, every time we have a need to apply military resolutions and military solutions, we should never do so.
Yes, we should abandon military intervention.
We should. That should also have been that chapter of the gospel of peace should also have been preached to the military junta in Niger, because as Omoniyi Oriogun said, there is the risk of contagion. If every hapless soldier who fancies himself a ruler of a country knows for sure that all he has to do is lock up the president in power, and then both international opinion and so-called international relations and pragmatics will prevent other states and prevent anyone from removing them. We will have not just 5 countries in Africa being under military rule. We will have 17, and very soon 25, and maybe even 50 out of the 57 going the military route. I think it is important that military people who plan military coups are not able to calculate that they will have peace, that they will not be interfered with by other forces, that the UN will not come in, that the AU will not come in, that the REX will not come in. That's dangerous. That's not good international policy. That once you have succeeded in the international, you are in.
I agree with you 100%.
I want to, sorry, David.
Yes, go ahead.
Bring in Omoniyi on that. Omoniyi,
yes.
What's your summation? What's your summation on this so-called rule or principle that says that we should have a situation where democratic regimes should be protected, and that anybody who has removed the democratic regime has committed what is now known under some parts of international law as a threat to peace? When you remove a government, a democratically enthroned government, when there's a continuous denial of democratic governance, that party doing that has committed a threat to peace. And when you commit a threat to peace, there are ample examples in international relations of forceful removal of such. This wouldn't be the first time even ECOWAS is acting. Why is Niger so special? Omoniyi, are you on this same side that nothing ought to be done and we should ignore the threat to peace that coup making represents in international relations of Africa today?
I'm not yet fully drawn on military intervention. I'm definitely not drawn on the let things lie where they lie. I'm somewhere in between. So my perspective at the moment would be to sanction them, cut them off, and basically close out Niger from the rest of the international community as much as possible. I think the West has cut off aid, France has cut off aid, Nigeria has closed its borders, and a lot more things besides should be done. I believe they get a lot of their supplies either from ports from Benin or from Nigeria, and that sanction should also be brought to bear. I think you're right in the principle that any coup maker in any African country should be in dread of 2 factors. One, do they succeed initially? And if they do succeed, how peaceful would their reign be after that success? And I think that is the best way to go. Now, whether a military intervention is the right way to go, that is a completely different matter. Nigeria, from what I've seen, and I put my hands up, I'm not a security expert, but from what I've seen, Nigeria struggles on guerrilla asymmetrical type of warfare. They are very good in conventional warfare. Niger at the moment is a conventional force, which means Nigeria should do well. If it turns out to be a kind of a Boko Haram type of establishment where it sort of dissipates into a guerrilla force, then it will
which can happen. We have to agree that can happen. Yeah.
Yes, and it can happen, and then all bets would be off. And quite frankly, Nigeria has shown from past experience to struggle in that type of warfare.
So, what are your gut instincts about the future on this? Are we going to see military action, or are we going to see accelerated democratic, I should say, diplomatic pressure? And where will we be this time next year?
Is that a question for me or for David?
Let's start with you.
I would think Nigeria, because of its current economic circumstances, because of a large affinity of our core northern populace, which is a major power center, as you know, in Nigeria, there is some trepidation towards active military intervention in Niger, because there are, as you know, similar tribes that occupy both Nigeria and Niger. So for that reason, I suspect Nigeria will be forced to, or Bola Tinubu, or the administration of Bola Tinubu will be forced to do everything diplomatically before going down the military route. That's how I see things playing out.
Let's face it. That's the demand of international law in the first place. Article 33 of the United Nations Charter says when there are international disputes, you must first of all seek negotiation, mediation, any of the alternative dispute. Apologies for that little break, forceful break on the recording. So we continue. I think the point I was making is that international law is replete with all kinds of peaceful means of resolving international disputes, which are short of the military option, asking for states to go through negotiation, mediation, use of good offices, and the general ambit of diplomatic means rather than the military option. And ideally, in international law and current international rules-based system, international relations, the use of force should only occur when states are in exercising their rights to self-determination. That's what the Charter of the United Nations says. So we ideally should not have to use kinetic force. We should not have to resort to military options. But then it's not fair to say, as I insist, and I'm sure there are quite a few people in my corner as well, that we should not have a situation where member states of rules-based bodies should be allowed to go to hell if they so wish. If you have taken upon yourself the limitation of your own sovereignty by joining up to the African Union, by joining on to the ECOWAS, and those bodies are committed to democratic principles, we should not have a situation where you can get away with, literally with murder. And there should be consequences to pay for trying to do so. We've seen that in Guinea-Bissau. ECOWAS stepped in Guinea-Bissau, ECOWAS stepped in Ivory Coast, ECOWAS stepped in Gambia, in Mali. Not in all cases did it step in by using force, but clearly in the case of Gambia, it was there in his imperial, joint imperial force. So it's not unheard of that we consider this option. Having said that, I think you gentlemen have your points in this area, and I take them very seriously because I do respect your opinions. My opinion is that the ECOWAS has issued out its ultimatum. If ECOWAS does not carry out its threats, if there has been a total disregard for its authority, I think Niger ought to face all possible measures, which includes military use. Otherwise, there's no point having this kind of bodies. But I do hope we find other solutions to the situation. What then should ECOWAS do now, David? What should ECOWAS do? The ultimatum is here. It's no longer a question of theory. We ought to start seeing practice tomorrow. I know that there is a big stem against the use of force. I know that the Nigerian people are divided upon this, that a lot of people see whatever President Bola Ahmed Tinubu wants to do as something that they just have to oppose as a matter of instinct. It's part of democracy. It's just a bit intriguing that the Niger Republic, which has always been seen nearly as a dirty word in Nigeria when President Muhammad Buhari was in power, and a country that was not even supposed to be deserving of a real link to Nigeria, suddenly we find all the Nigerian political critics very much in love with Niger Republic and saying nothing must happen to our African brothers there. So I'm finding it hard personally to distinguish between committed and principled opposition to the use of force and the fog of politics which is going on in Nigeria. And to that extent, I would like to know from you what you think ECOWAS should do. You are an ECOWAS brother. You are a brother from Cameroon, and you have a bit of a detached, point of view, and I'll be very much interested in that. And I would also like to hear from our brother Omoniyi what he thinks Nigeria should do next. What are these two things different? Let's start with you, David.
Yeah, so I don't speak from a Nigerian or any ECOWAS member point of view. I speak from a professional point of view, I have some advantage in the fact that I have covered issues related to defense, national security, what it takes to go to war, and the first and second order effects. What I think ECOWAS should do is that ECOWAS should pursue a non-military approach. And what does that mean, in essence? It means that ECOWAS should initiate a special committee that would put pressure on the military junta to hand over power to a transitional government, and that transitional government should include a 1-year maximum roadmap or less, that it will organize fresh elections. And in that organization of the fresh election, President Bazoum, who has been dethroned, should be allowed to run. That is what I think ECOWAS should do. Whether this is going to be acceptable by the military junta is a guess that nobody has an answer to. The option of ECOWAS going to war using military intervention has a lot of unknowns. One, you can select when ECOWAS can go into war, but they cannot select if, one, they would achieve what they go to what is the mission perspective. So if they want to restore President Bazoum, he might even be eliminated before they get to him. Who knows, what the military junta is capable of doing. Remember that a military coup is a matter of life and death, for those who organize it. They know the consequences of, not winning at the end of it. So the mission to restore President Bazoum might not even be successful. So I think that the military option is out of the table. I have seen America plans to invade Afghanistan, to remove the Taliban. 20 years later, spending lots of money, losing lives, they replaced the Taliban with the Taliban. I've seen the regime change in Libya, in Syria, how it has devastated the country. But these were all predicted to be very short wars that will be beneficial to the people. I've seen the same scenario happening in Somalia. I've seen the same happening in Sudan, where we thought Omar al-Bashir being removed from power, would better the situation in Sudan, but it hasn't happened the same. So I do not want to.
But we also have seen Gambia, where the muzzle and the presence of ECOWAS achieved something.
A totally different scenario. In the case of Gambia, which I know very well, I was even opportunity to travel to Gambia at the time, and I've been there a couple of times. I know the case of Gambia very well. What happened in the case of Gambia was that a president lost an election and he refused to hand over power to the man who won the elections. And in that case, you had the support of the chief of army staff, who had literally told his men to stand down. You had the support of a majority of the Gambian population coming out to denounce the president. So you had the support of the people, or some of the people, or most of the people, and you had the support of some of the military. In this case of Niger, we do not see that we would have the support of any military faction because they are all united as we speak. That could change, but it hasn't changed. We have the support of the population. Again, it might just be the population in Niamey, but Niamey is the ground zero. This is where the focus of the potential ECOWAS, intervention would be. So if the military doesn't have
if I can just comment very briefly there, I'm not a fan of the use of crowds to measure the popularity or the integrity of any political arrangement. I am a child of military coups in Nigeria. What by that I mean, my entire youth was experienced various coups in Nigeria. As an instance, I saw up to 4 or 5 coups. I know how it plays. We know how it starts off with the playing martial music in the morning, not going out for 1 or 2 days, and then other, in quotes, stepping in. Not one of the coups I've experienced in my life, or coup, situations, including the ones that failed, not one of them you can say did not have citizens coming out and saying, "Hoorah, hoorah! Yeah, someone has come to save them at last," or giving support vocally. They all come like that. So I don't think it's even something we should spend a minute on. We've just lost a friend, David Otto. I hope he will be back. Yeah, but I can continue, and I'm sure Omoniyi will also step in on that. The general thing is that someone seeking legitimacy would rent a crowd if he needs one. And yes, maybe he actually is popular and people do turn up and say, but that does not remove the fact that the existence of a coup plot is not the way we envisage power to pass in a democratic system. So I'm not impressed at all about people in the streets. And for me, again, as a child of coups and military regimes in Nigeria and in Africa, from my observation, not one single military regime can be said to have delivered for his country. These are closet psychopaths. Many of them would abuse human rights unendingly. It's already started in Niger as we speak. The 1 or 2 people who have been vocal enough to condemn the coup have been picked and they are locked up. The same people who have this infantile relationship of expectation of leadership from the military will be soon complaining that their human rights to speech is being abused.
Yes, but Doctor, sorry to interrupt you.
Yes,
Doctor, sorry to interrupt you. I think you're speaking of a different angle. No one that I've seen has said that not from my side.
Yeah.
I don't condone any military coup, so there is no justification. So there is no one saying that the military is going to bring a better system of governance in Niger than the previous government that was overthrown. Nobody, I mean, I'm not saying that, for sure. And,
Yes.
I'm not an advocate of a military coup. My point is that I am basing my argument based on what will be achieved by different measures that have been put in place. You cannot use an undemocratic method, to try and protect a democratic method, a democratic system. The government has been overthrown. The injury has been caused. ECOWAS, failed, to protect its members from military coups. What they must succeed to do now is to learn on how to prevent these coups from happening again. But I don't think that ECOWAS using a military intervention will solve the problem of Niger. It will not solve that problem because there are so many unknowns. And that is why I believe that what should be done is that ECOWAS should, put forward measures that could perhaps bring back Nigerians, through a democratic process. And then the next step is to make sure that each ECOWAS member protects themselves against further military coup. They can come to Nigeria, for example, and sit with the Nigerian.
Yeah, I appreciate your view, and I think you're quite persuasive. I haven't had anything that I find that I would like to disagree with in that. Those are viable solutions, and I'm sure by the end of the year, or let's say by the end of the process, some of your solutions will definitely float to the top of possibility and reality. Omoniyi, what should Nigeria do? It's a bit different from what should ECOWAS do. It could be the same, but from your knowledge of the government in power, the personality of Bola Ahmed Tinubu, his plans, his foreign policy leanings, what do you think Nigeria would do and what should Nigeria do?
Okay, before I go on to that, there's just a point I want to take from what David said, because David said his view would be for ECOWAS to have a kind of an interim government and allowing the deposed president to still run for office. I'm not so sure how that can be intellectually justified. Well, not intellectually justified, I mean justified from a principle perspective. And if the previous government was elected, I think in 2021, and his term hasn't expired, why would you go for an interim government to set up an election in which the deposed president also runs again for election when his existing term hasn't come to an end? That I can't yet get my mind across the finish line on that one from a principle perspective. And why should Nigeria get involved in that process to achieve that end? I don't know. But for your question in terms of what Nigeria's basic interest probably is, Nigeria has an interest obviously in West Africa being safe. It also has an interest in having a partner against bandit incursion into northern Nigeria, Boko Haram operations in the northeast and parts of the northwest, and Islamic terrorism that seems to be permeating that area. It also has an economic, obviously, reason in West Africa. A lot of its trade is with West Africa, and also, although we don't know the full extent of it, there is, I think, the African Development Bank gave the go-ahead for financing, or gave positive noises towards the financing of the Nigeria-Algeria pipeline. And as you know, one of the core parts of Bola Tinubu's, or President Bola Tinubu's, rejigging or economic reforms of Nigeria is moving Nigeria away from oil and much more towards gas. And its low-hanging fruit, as you know, is the European market. And for obvious reasons, the European market at this point in time is positively disposed to dealing with Nigeria. So Nigeria has an interest in ensuring that it can export its gas and export its gas to Europe. Now, I take the point David made. We don't know for sure of the extent of Russia's involvement in Niger or in the Niger coup. And I won't even conflate Russia with the Wagner Group. Apparently, they are deemed as distinct and separate operators. And whether that's for simple reasons of deniability, or whether in fact they are different, or whether they're complementary, we don't really know at the moment. What we do know is that after coups have happened in Mali, I believe, Burkina Faso, and now Niger, there has been movement towards Russia, or the Wagner Group, as it were, for some kind of security agreement or arrangement. So from a Nigerian perspective, it definitely has an economic factor here. As long as Niger doesn't do anything to sabotage the pipeline, and from present noises, it looks like it will. And then there is the broader interest of discouraging military coups, especially from a Nigerian democratic perspective. The last thing we want is a coup culture coming or rearing its head again. So we obviously want to stop that. We also want to have a peaceful environment, and we also want to be able to focus on our own economic problems and turn things around. Neither of those ones are inimical to having a war right at our doorstep in which we're involved. So there's a lot of conflicting points that point in both directions, and how Nigeria sort of squares the needle, or threads the needle, as it were, is for the greatest minds in the Nigerian security architecture to resolve, I think.
Okay. There are other big players in this, like the AU, like Algeria. You know, the countries, some of the countries that, if we have Bola Ahmed Tinubu's way, the gas line is supposed to pass from Nigeria to the European territories.
Yeah.
Let's look at the possibility that can even happen in the Africa that we have. We have an Africa where clearly we have not transcended our many instabilities, whether it's tribal, whether it's the Islamist fundamentalists, whether it's just sheer bad governance. What are the chances that a mature regime of gas pipelines can traverse 5-6 countries to Europe in an international environment where that would mean competition for a Russia?
Let me just correct you there. Yes. The pipeline would go through 3 countries.
Okay.
The main one, that's Nigeria, Niger, and Algeria.
Okay, so it will be Nigeria, Niger, Algeria, and it's good news then, therefore, that or maybe complication, who knows, that the Algerian president has just signaled that they are not going to be, the Algerian president, Tebboune, I think his name is, has signaled that he opposes any military intervention in Niger as well. So that puts Nigeria in a very tight position. Yeah, please go on.
I think this is you know, a critical point that you're mentioning. This was a project that, you know, was first signed in 2009, and then another MOU was signed last year in 2022. It's a huge project, $13 billion project. It covers about 4,000 kilometers, you know, beginning from Warri, which is, you know, the southern part of Nigeria, across to Niger, and then to Algeria, which is, you know, the holder of that MOU. It was signed in Algiers. So there is a huge, you know, business to be made. And perhaps one of the reasons why Algeria has made it very clear that it does not want to not just be involved in any support, but it would actively, discourage any military intervention. This is a gas pipeline that Europe sees as an alternative to the weaponization of gas by Russia. Russia saying, we will not deliver any more gas to the European world, and that's why you see Germany much more involved in Niger Republic as well with a military base. So there is a big business case to be made. Now it is up to Nigeria, Niger, and other African countries to determine whether they want to do that business in a climate of war, instability, or they want to do it in a climate of stability. Nigeria shares 7 states share borders with Niger, families cut across each country. I don't think that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has any interest in not developing Nigeria as he has promised during his campaign. I don't think he would want to initiate any instability in that part of the country. I think that there is a big case to be made that in his tenure, which is now as we speak, once this pipeline begins to roll over, I think there will be a massive advantage from a stability point for Nigeria to benefit. So a case for war for me is just one way of distracting us.
Gentlemen, you can't make eggs without breaking. You can't make omelette without breaking some eggs. It's not possible. There's no way you're going to have respect for that pre-existing arrangements under the existing climate we have. Clearly, for a very long time, there's going to be a schism between Nigeria and Niger because of what has happened. We're already there.
Yes, but we've taken
a principled position against that government. That government is not going to be in love with the Nigerian states and the Nigerian government for a very long time. So we've passed that stage now. What I do agree that there's a problem that and I was the first to raise it, that what are the chances that a complex commercial and an economic arrangement like that is going to survive all this? I'm not very hopeful on that. But I'm more about the democratic problem that we are envisaging and we are facing. We are facing a situation where, from what everybody appears to be saying, the existing junta in Niger is going to get away with this. And then every single hapless soldier in all the other African states will fancy his bets brighter. There's the risk of contagion, which nobody is talking about. You might want to appease peace now, but like I say, you're going to have 15 African states succumb to military regimes over the next many years. And we've seen that before. The military governments are useless in power. They are useless, completely useless. They address nothing. They steal. Just a minute. General Abacha stole $5 billion alone. And he wasn't the only one who was stealing. General Ibrahim Babangida, still alive today, has a landing port for private jets in his Mina residence. That's the stuff of the people we are talking about here. These are kleptocrats. So I don't think there's anything to be gained in letting them slip into power because, we can't do this and we don't want to break that head. They know this. They've done this before. They did it throughout the 70s. They did it throughout the 80s. We barely escaped from them and we are slipping back into them because everybody wants peace. You're going to have the peace of the graveyard very soon in many African states. Niger is already one of the poorest countries. It's not going to get any better being left alone in the hands of psychopaths. That's my point of view. But again, I'm willing to listen to you.
I totally agree, Dr. Wenga, but I'm still going back to the point which I made in the opening statement. There is no one. I don't support a military coup, and I've never made any argument, and I will not make any argument that a military junta will do better, because there is no evidence, based on what we've seen in Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, that the justifications. yes, so the justifications of insecurity, economy, and corruption has been resolved, by a military junta. They haven't made that argument. My focus here is on next steps. What measures will work, and what are the consequences, of those measures not working? Where did the rain begin to hit us? That question must be asked. It was because, first of all, Nigeria and ECOWAS, sent some ultimatums. Nigeria has now unilaterally cut off the electricity in Niger. There was an agreement which was made, to secure the dams in Nigeria. In return for supply of electricity, Niger Republic, was prohibited from, damming the River Nile.
Well, international law prohibits them from damming it in any case. You are not allowed to dam your river that's in such a way that is going to have an effect in countries down
there.
Yeah.
So when you unilaterally when you make those agreements on the basis that you will supply them with electricity and then you cut it off, you're almost like you're the one who threw the first punch.
And who is complaining? The person who took power by force, the person who disregarded the constitutional authority of his own country, is the first person to point us to where the law is on any issue. I don't agree about that.
But on doctrine of sovereignty, as you know, you and I know, a coup d'etat is an internal matter. Niger Republic does not pose a direct military threat to the government of Nigeria. It doesn't. It doesn't. If you want to speculate about which country poses a threat, you can as well attack everybody, because you think everyone could be a threat. My point has always been that we must not use a democratic method to remove a democratic government, especially invading a sovereign state. What we should do as ECOWAS is to come up with measures, that would prevent coups from happening. We must.
Do you want to explain to me what then happens when you join associations such as the ECOWAS and you join the AU? Have you not submitted part of your sovereignty to these larger groups? Yeah,
you're absolutely correct, and you can look into those laws. But one of the arguments that has been made is that once you take power through military coup, you're not acting on behalf of that country. The military junta is not acting on behalf of the country. It is acting on its own. But it does happen that it now has the wherewithal of the population behind it. You must remember also that the same ECOWAS has ignored constitutional coups where ECOWAS member states, have unilaterally changed, constitutions to run for additional terms in the middle of the game.
And I condemn that. I condemn that, and I think that shouldn't.
Yes, but not ECOWAS. Yeah, which is good, but you don't happen to be ECOWAS. And we're talking about what ECOWAS should do. And then ECOWAS then sent a president who himself took power through a coup. To go and negotiate with somebody who has taken power through a coup.
Yeah,
ECOWAS member states.
Maybe he knows better. He should know better because he was the one who also handed over power to a civilian government in Nigeria. If you are talking about General Abdul Salam.
Yes, which means that at one point you're recognizing a coup beneficiary, and another point you're trying to invade one. Look, for example, I would have expected that as soon as ECOWAS members who were in Russia, in St. Petersburg, in that conference, as soon as they saw the coupists of Burkina Faso, the coupists of Niger, the coupists of Guinea on that table sitting, they would have protested and said, we will not sit down on the same table with coup beneficiaries because we don't recognize them. But what happened? They all sat down, they shook hands, they ate on the same areas. And how come you will now believe that and someone else is not going to do the same thing? So the behavior of ECOWAS has been in such a way that it has not been proactive. So now it has made mistakes. It has to learn from those mistakes. But I don't subscribe to an African country invading another African country. This would just be in the benefit of the Western countries who would have to supply us with those weapons. We don't have weapons. They will supply us with the weapons, and it will come at a huge cost. which of course, that cost would be our mineral resources.
Omoniyi, if I may move to you, what do you think this all means for us in the area of the economy, and particularly our problem with imperialism, with the imperial powers like France and the big colonial? But what does this mean in terms of emancipation or entrenchment of African states in their empire?
Well, France, insofar as West Africa is concerned, is hemorrhaging influence, it seems. There seems to be a concerted effort away from French influence, and the Wagner Group seems to be helping, in inverted commas, in that respect. France has always been a de facto balancing power in West Africa insofar as Nigeria is being concerned. They have existing defense arrangements with a number of West African countries, which compels France to come to their aid should they be invaded. So there might be some advantage to Nigeria to allowing the decimation of French interests to take place. And personally, Russia or the former Soviet Union have been very helpful to Nigeria in the past. As you know, it was a staunch supporter of Nigeria during the Nigerian Civil War. And they had been supporters of, I think they were a staunch supporter of the South African Black population. So they have been a friend to Africa. I think the only divergence here seems to be, and we don't know for sure, but it seems to be there may be the divergence of interest between Russia and Nigeria insofar as gas is concerned, and insofar as the European gas market is concerned. Outside of that, we obviously should be concerned if there's going to be another major European power starting to exert itself right in our backyard. Very few major powers allow that to happen, and I don't see why Nigeria should be any different. So there are positives in relation to the reduction in French influence. Nigerian French interests may converge slightly and narrowly insofar as the pipeline is concerned. But generally, Nigeria and Russia tend to move in the same direction in terms of our core interests have been more reliable partners for Nigeria than the West has been. So there are a lot of blurry areas, to be honest, and there are advantages to being supported with France in a limited perspective. I still think Nigeria is better served not making an enemy of Russia. But Nigeria's interest is in being able to supply gas to Europe as well, which puts us in direct opposition economically economically with Russia, and which puts us at some kind of variance with their own strategic interests. So how all this thing plays out, I have no idea.
David, the question is, what does this all mean for the emancipation of African states from imperialism and the clutches of the former colonial powers, particularly France? You might have to unmute yourself.
Yes. So thank you for that. I think geopolitics is real, and it plays a very powerful role, especially when it comes to economic interest. And economic interest has a way of influencing political interest. Once geopolitical states secure political interest, that aligns directly with economic interest. So, for example, countries like France, would want to make sure that they sustain their geopolitical interest and indirectly their economic interest in the Sahel. France, explores, and I'll use the word exploit, Niger Republic from uranium and other, raw materials. It did the same with Burkina Faso and other countries, and it continues to do the same. So I think that there is an economic element which Nigeria has to see as my dear here just mentioned. Nigeria has to be an age. Statecraft is a very important character for each country to have. How do you leverage your own interest against the interest of countries like France? And how do you then manage the blowback that that could come with countries like Russia or the United States?
Thank you very much. We have less than 1 minute, and I'll just use this opportunity to thank both of you, David Endley and Omoniyi Oriogun, proud sons of Africa and clear thinkers. I respect your views. I think we've done a bit of a justice to this problem, and I look forward to the next few weeks and months to see how much of our predictions here actually played out at the end of the day. I think this is going to go on for quite a while. It's not going to be a small picnic, but I wish Nigeria, I wish Niger, I wish Africa all the